just got this lens in the mail today. I'm going to walk around a little bit and see if the autofocus tracks me, and then I'll show some sample photos from downtown. So today was my first day with the Sigma 56 1.4, and I was really happy with how sharp this lens was. I feel like it could even replace a longer telephoto zoom because you could crop into the image and it would still be sharper than my EFM 55 to 200 millimeter lens. It has a 55 millimeter filter thread if you want to put an ND filter or a UV filter on the front of it. This is available in the Canon EFM mount, which is what I was shooting on today on the M50. It's also available in micro 4/3, and it's available for the Sony E mount. So it's a 56 millimeter lens, but since this is a crop sensor camera, this camera is APS-C, you have to multiply that times around 1.6. If it's a micro 4/3 camera, the sensor is even smaller, so you have to multiply that by a larger number. But on the camera I'm currently using it on, the Canon M50, it's about an 89.6 millimeter, 35 millimeter equivalent. So it's around 90 millimeters if you were talking about a full frame camera. A full frame camera is going off a 35 millimeter sensor, kind of like 35 millimeter film, around that same size. The APS-C is 1.6 times smaller than that. So if you put full frame lenses on crop sensor cameras, not all the light that comes in through the lens will hit the sensor because the sensor is not as big. It's got an aperture range between 1.4 and f16. So if you want to crank it all the way up to f22, you don't have that option. So if it's really bright, you might have to bring an ND filter. Now, I didn't use an ND filter at all, didn't have one that size. So all I did was crank the shutter speed up all day and shoot with a really high shutter speed, which you can do. If you want a really blurry waterfall or something like that, you might have to get an ND filter, but if not, you can just crank up the shutter speed. It goes up to like 1/4000th of a second on this camera. It's got one SLD element, two aspherical elements, and a super multi-layer coating. So the coating worked well. It also comes with a lens hood, which was really helpful because I didn't really get any flaring at all with this lens. It has a stepping motor autofocus system. The autofocus is phenomenal. If I just tap my screen on what I want to focus on, as soon as I tap it, it focuses and takes the picture immediately. Also, if I just push the shutter down, as soon as I've pushed the shutter down, it's focused and taken the photo before I even let up on the shutter. So it's a very fast autofocus system, probably the fastest on any lens I've ever used. So it's weather sealed, but the M50 is not weather sealed. It's got a rounded 9-blade diaphragm. So this lens is lacking any type of optical stabilization. The camera has digital stabilization, but unlike the EFM 55 to 200 millimeter lens that I talked about in a previous video, it does not have any type of stabilization. So if you are shooting video with it, you're probably going to want to bring a gimbal, some type of monopod, tripod, something to keep it stable, because you are definitely going to see a lot of shake in video if you're filming at 90 millimeters full frame equivalent with no stabilization. But saying that, the good thing about this lens is it is very small and very light. You could definitely use it on a gimbal. Even the Crane M2, the gimbal for lightweight cameras, you could still use this lens and this camera on that gimbal because it's so lightweight. It's not much bigger than the kit lens. So this lens is very, very sharp. That's the best thing about this lens. Also, you're going to get some sharpness in the background, in the bokeh. The bokeh is not going to be completely smooth just because this lens is so sharp. It can't allow anything to be completely smooth. But it gives you a really interesting look with a very shallow depth of field, and it's still sharp at f1.4. This would be a great lens if you were doing street photography and you wanted to turn your photos black and white and make them kind of gritty and sharp, contrasty. It's got a lot of contrast, a lot of colors. So this lens is good for people that want a really sharp photo, and a film lens is good for somebody who wants a really soft, dreamy image. So this is definitely by far the best lens I've ever used for street photography. For years, I used manual focus film lenses for street photography, but it took so much extra time to take all that time to manually focus. With this lens, you're in, out, you don't miss any moments, and that's something that you would miss with a manual focus lens. This is going to help you get more photos, capture more moments before they're over. With street photography, you have to do things fast. You can't waste a lot of time. And this lens is sharp enough that you could take a larger frame and crop in. It would still be sharp, and you wouldn't have that color fringing that you have on a lot of other lenses, like zoom lenses. On the FD lens I was getting all kinds of weird color fringing around the person, and that really ruins the photo. Also, those lenses don't have as fast an aperture, so that is saying they do not let as much light in. So because of that, you have to have slower shutter speeds. With this lens, you can have really fast shutter speeds because it lets more light in. That's why it's called fast, because you can have faster shutter speeds. Even the EFM 55 to 200 millimeter lens, I was getting some color fringing sometimes on photos, and sometimes it was just kind of ghostly. It was like faded and not contrasty. With this lens, I've found that it's sharper and it has more contrast and more saturation than a lot of the other lenses, probably any other lens I've used on this camera. A lot of people would say, well, why don't you just use the Nifty 50 or the Yonguro 50 millimeter lens with a speed booster or with a Viltrox adapter? Well, those lenses are a lot slower when it comes to autofocus. They hunt a lot more, and they don't just lock on and take the picture. They waste a lot of time. They're definitely cheaper, but they do require a little more time to actually work. And as far as video, the autofocus is perfect on this lens. It works really well. So yeah, it's a great lens. You don't have time to waste when you're doing street photography and when you're making videos. So a lot of those other lenses that are hunting and they don't autofocus well are just not worth it. Like the 30 millimeter 1.4 from Sigma is a lot slower when it comes to autofocus than the 56 or the 16. The 56 millimeter and the 16 millimeter are kind of on par with each other. They're both really quick and they work really well. That's because they're newer than the 30 millimeter. It came out a year before the 16 and 2 years before the 56. So now we've got a trio and they all work really well together. The 56 has the best autofocus. It is the newest of all three of the Sigma primes. So I would definitely suggest this lens. I've got a link in the description below to all the camera gear I use, including the 56mm f1.4 from Sigma that we're talking about in this video. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you like this kind of content, reviews, tutorials, and videos about what I'm learning as I grow as a filmmaker, hit that subscribe button, and thanks for watching.